You win. I lose. You walk away with the house, the money, and him. I'm out. The hotel room is yours tonight, and I hope he appreciates the little gift I left behind. Don't bother returning it, it'll just remind me of your betrayal. I'm heading home alone. Let me know when someone will pick up your things. Anything I don't need, I'll pack in trash bags and leave in the garage, fitting, considering what you turned our marriage into. My father used to say when faced with an impossible choice, well, hooray for me and too bad for you. I'm done here. Enjoy your trip. You've earned it. 10 years later, on a dull Wednesday morning, sharp knocking jolted me awake. 8:15 a.m. Who knocks this early? I threw on a robe, trudged downstairs, and peeked through the peephole. A frail, weathered woman stood there, almost unrecognizable. I cracked the door open. Recognition punched me in the gut. Daisy. Her voice trembled. Mike. It's me. Can I come in? No, the door clicked shut. But the knocking persisted, her voice cracking. Please, Mike. I'm begging you. Frustration boiled over. I yanked the door open. What are you doing here, Daisy? I told you 10 years ago I never wanted to see you again. Did that not sink in? And why now? Shouldn't you be in Milwaukee with Dr. Perfect? Her face crumpled, and she stared at her shoes. Please, Mike. I'm exhausted, hungry, and I need the restroom. She shifted uncomfortably. With a resigned sigh, I stepped aside. Bathroom's where you left it. Make it quick. She scurried past me, clutching a battered suitcase. I rubbed my temples and moved to the kitchen, flipping on the coffee maker. By the time she reappeared, the smell of coffee filled the air. Coffee, she asked softly. I poured her a mug. No fancy creamer. Just milk and sugar. Black is fine. Her hands trembled around the cup. For a fleeting second, pity flickered, but it was quickly smothered by old hurt simmering in my chest. Why are you here, Daisy? Her voice cracked. I have nowhere else to go. I spent my last money on a cab to get here. What happened to your perfect life with Bruce? She flinched. We married after the divorce. It was good for a while, but then he got hit with a malpractice lawsuit. We lost everything, house, cars, savings. And Bruce changed. Changed how? He became angry, bitter, cruel. Then one day, I came home early and found him with someone else. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. So the cheater got cheated on. How poetic. It's not funny, Mike. No, it's not. But neither was our 10th anniversary when you humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I know, she whispered. Do you? You didn't just break trust, Daisy. You broke me. She stared into her coffee, silent and pale. So what now? What do you want, sympathy? Forgiveness? I don't have either to give. No, she said softly. I just hoped you'd let me stay. Just until I figure something out. There's a homeless shelter downtown. They're full. Everywhere, the YWCA, the church, they have no space. Please, Mike. I'll cook, clean, whatever you need. Just let me stay. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The anger, the betrayal, they were still there, sharp and fresh. But beneath it, a flicker of something else, pity, maybe. Or just the ghost of the man I used to be. What makes you think I'd want you here, Daisy? After everything? She didn't answer. Silent tears slipped down her face. How far you've fallen, I said after a long pause. How far, and how hard? You win. I lose. You walk away with the house, the money, and him. I'm out. The hotel room is yours tonight, and I hope he appreciates the little gift I left behind. Don't bother trying to return it, it'll just remind me of your betrayal. I'm heading home alone. Let me know when someone will pick up your things. Anything I don't need, I'll pack in trash bags and leave them in the garage, fitting, considering what you turned our marriage into. My father used to say when faced with an impossible choice, well, hooray for me and too bad for you. I'm done here. Enjoy your trip. You've earned it. 10 years later, sharp knocking jolted me awake. 8:15 a.m. Who knocks this early? I threw on a robe, trudged downstairs, and peeked through the peephole. A frail, weathered woman stood there, almost unrecognizable. I cracked the door open. Recognition punched me in the gut. Daisy. Mike. It's me. Can I come in? No. The door clicked shut. But the knocking persisted. Her voice cracked. Please, Mike. I'm begging you. Frustration boiled over. I yanked the door open. What are you doing here, Daisy? I told you 10 years ago I never wanted to see you again. Why now? Shouldn't you be in Milwaukee with Dr. Perfect? Her face crumpled. Please, Mike. I'm exhausted, hungry, and I need the restroom. With a sigh, I stepped aside. Bathroom's where you left it. Make it quick. She rushed past me, clutching a battered suitcase. In the kitchen, I flipped on the coffee maker. By the time she reappeared, the smell of coffee filled the air. Coffee, she asked softly. I poured her a mug. No fancy creamer. Just milk and sugar. Black is fine. Her hands trembled around the cup. For a second, pity flickered, but it was smothered by old hurt simmering in my chest. Why are you here, Daisy? I have nowhere else to go. I spent my last money on a cab. What happened to your perfect life with Bruce? She flinched. We married after the divorce. It was good for a while, but then he got hit with a malpractice lawsuit. We lost everything, house, cars, savings. And Bruce changed. How? He became angry, bitter, cruel. Then I came home one day and found him with someone else. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. So the cheater got cheated on. How poetic. It's not funny, Mike. No, it's not. But neither was our 10th anniversary when you humiliated me in front of everyone. Do you know what that did to me? I know, she whispered. Do you? You didn't just break trust, Daisy. You broke me. She stared into her coffee, pale and silent. So what now? Sympathy? Forgiveness? I have neither to give. No. I just hoped you'd let me stay. Just until I figure something out. There's a homeless shelter downtown. They're full. Everywhere, the YWCA, the church, they have no space. Please, Mike. I'll cook, clean, anything. Just let me stay. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The anger, the betrayal, they were still sharp and fresh. But beneath it, something else flickered, pity, maybe. Or just the ghost of the man I used to be. What makes you think I'd want you here, Daisy? After everything? She didn't answer. Silent tears slipped down her face. How far you've fallen, I said after a long pause. How far, and how hard? Daisy sat across from me at the kitchen table, shoulders trembling, tears slipping silently down her face. Her sobs were quiet but relentless, each breath a fragile whisper. I watched her, unmoved at first, my anger still sharp despite the years. For a decade, I'd carried this rage like a stone in my chest. Therapy, writing, martial arts, none of it had truly let me release it. And yet, seeing her now, small, broken, trembling, that anger felt duller. But Bruce, that was different. The man who stole her just to ruin her. I hated him with a cold, quiet intensity. I exhaled slowly. Let's eat first, I said, my voice flat. Then we'll talk. She nodded weakly. Thank you. I'm so hungry. I turned to the fridge, pulling out eggs, cheese, bacon, and bread. The sizzle of bacon and eggs filled the silence as I cooked. When I set a plate in front of her, scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and toast, her eyes lit up faintly. You remembered the cheese, she said softly. Eat, I replied curtly. She devoured the food, barely pausing between bites. I chewed my own meal in silence, studying her hollow eyes and trembling hands. When she was done, she wiped her mouth. Thank you. I haven't eaten in I don't know how long. You want more? No, but could I have another coffee? I poured her another cup. She clutched it tightly, knuckles white against the ceramic. Feel better now? I asked. A little. The food helped. You should shower, I said bluntly. No offense, but you smell like a bus station. She flinched but nodded. I know. I'm sorry. Can I use your shower? You know where it is. Towels are still in the same place. And don't put my robe back on afterward. She grabbed her battered suitcase and disappeared into the bathroom. I started on the dishes, scrubbing them clean, then headed upstairs to change. As I pulled on a fresh shirt, memories clawed their way back, the night she left me, our 10th anniversary. She had humiliated me in front of everyone, walked away without a second glance. I poured every ounce of anger into writing. My book, raw and bitter, never hit bestseller lists but sold enough to secure my future. Martial arts became another outlet, teaching me discipline when my emotions threatened to boil over. But none of it prepared me for this moment, for her sitting here, broken and lost. When I returned downstairs, Daisy sat on the couch, wrapped in my old robe. Her damp hair clung to her face. More coffee? I asked. Yes, please. I handed her a fresh cup and sat across from her. There are things I need to understand, I said. You said Bruce was sued for malpractice. Wasn't he insured for that? She sighed heavily. He was. But the lawsuit turned into a class action case. The insurance company pulled coverage. The accusations stuck, even the ones that weren't true. We lost everything. Not all the accusations were false, though, were they? She hesitated. No. Some were true. But most were exaggerated. It didn't matter. We lost our jobs, our licenses, our home. And then. He became angry, bitter. He blamed me. And one day, I came home early and found him with someone else. I shook my head. So the cheater got cheated on. How poetic. It's not funny, Mike. No, it's not. But neither was the night you humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. She stared into her coffee, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Do you know what that night did to me, Daisy? You didn't just break trust. You shattered me. I know, she whispered. We sat in silence, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air. So what now? What do you want from me? Forgiveness? Pity? No, she said softly. I just hoped you'd let me stay. Just until I can figure something out. There are shelters downtown. They're full. Everywhere I've tried, the YWCA, the church. Please, Mike. I'll cook, clean, whatever you need. Just let me stay. I studied her, the anger still sharp, but softened by something else, pity, maybe. Or the ghost of the man I used to be. What makes you think I'd want you here, Daisy? After everything? She didn't answer. Silent tears slipped down her face. How far you've fallen, I said after a long pause. How far, and how hard? What about savings? Retirement accounts? Anything. We had 401ks, Daisy said softly. But it was gone in a year, fines, bills, legal fees. We burned through everything. And Bruce? What's he doing now? He's a parking lot attendant. $16 an hour. I couldn't help the faint smirk. Bruce, the big shot doctor, reduced to handing out parking tickets. What about you, Daisy? What's your plan? She hesitated, eyes downcast. I thought I could work in the medical field again. Maybe start over somehow. I sighed, staring into my coffee cup. How do you plan to get around? Where were you planning to stay? I'll walk or take the bus, she said weakly. And for a place to stay? I'll figure something out. But everything takes money. And you don't have any. She shook her head. You were hoping I'd let you stay here, weren't you? Support you until you get back on your feet. Her voice trembled. Yes. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, Mike. And I know I don't deserve your kindness. But back then, I was so caught up in the fantasy of a perfect life with Bruce. I didn't realize the damage I'd done until it was too late. You're right about one thing, I don't owe you anything. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she'd break down again. But something in me softened. Despite everything, I couldn't shut her out completely. You need help, Daisy. It's obvious. My mom's coming over soon. She wants to talk to you before I make any decisions. Relief flashed across her face. Of course. I always admired your mother. She loved me like a daughter. And she still does, I said. But you need to be honest with her. Brutally honest. Don't hide anything. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. I promise, Mike. I'll tell her everything. A moment passed before she whispered, "Thank you for giving me a chance." The doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mom standing there, clutching her purse and wearing her familiar warm smile. "Emily, my goodness," she said as she stepped inside and spotted Daisy in my robe. "Has it really been 10 years?" They hugged briefly. Despite the awkwardness, the warmth was genuine. "James, why don't you let us girls talk for a bit?" my mom said gently. I nodded and retreated to my office. I pulled up my laptop and searched through old news archives about Bruce's malpractice case. The details made my stomach turn. For years, Bruce had diagnosed almost every patient with epilepsy, most of them children. They'd been subjected to unnecessary treatments, heavy medications, and invasive procedures, all while Bruce pocketed money from insurance payouts. Daisy, as his nurse, had been part of the process. Whether she had been complicit or simply following orders didn't matter to the courts. Parents recalled how Daisy delivered those devastating diagnoses with clinical detachment. Both of them lost their medical licenses, and the hospital paid out hundreds of thousands in refunds. I closed my laptop, my head spinning. Daisy had been part of the machine, but Bruce had been the architect. Whether she had known the extent of his actions or not, it didn't absolve her entirely. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. My mom peeked in, her face etched with concern. "James. I think Daisy needs to see Dr. McGregor as soon as possible." My stomach dropped. Dr. Terry McGregor had been our family doctor for years. My mother wasn't one to jump to conclusions. "Why?" I asked cautiously. "I can't diagnose her, but I've seen women with cancer before. If I had to guess, I'd say she's very sick, James. She needs medical help immediately." Cancer. The word hung heavy in the air. Mom continued, "Dr. McGregor's agreed to see her today. He'll run tests and help her with Medicaid paperwork. If it's serious, he'll refer her to a specialist." I nodded, words failing me. Cancer. I hadn't even considered it, but now it all made sense, the weight loss, the hollow cheeks, the exhaustion etched into her face. I hesitated. "You can't afford this, Mom. Let me cover it." I pressed $200 bills into her hand. "Thank you, James," she said softly. "You're a good son. And I know this isn't for her, it's because it's the right thing to do. That's how your father and I raised you." "Just so we're clear," I said firmly, "I'm not forgiving her. And I'm definitely not taking her back." "I understand," Mom replied with a sad smile. Before she left, I asked, "Did she tell you Robert hurt her?" "Yes," she said, her voice heavy. After they left, I changed into workout clothes and punished myself on the stationary bike. For 40 minutes, I pushed through the burn, sweat pouring down my face. It wasn't enough to quiet my thoughts. Later, after a shower, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. Her voice was soft, tired. "Dr. McGregor thinks Daisy might have cervical cancer, James. But he wants an oncologist to confirm. She has an appointment on Friday." The weight of her words hit me hard. Cancer. We stopped by Walmart to pick up a few things for her. "I think she should stay with me for now. She'll be more comfortable." "That's probably for the best," I said quietly. Thank you for handling this, Mom. Hours later, they returned for Daisy's suitcase. She stood by the door, clutching the handle like a lifeline. I'll stay with your mom if that's okay with you, she said softly. That's up to her, I replied, avoiding her eyes. They left, and I closed the door behind them. For the first time in years, I felt something I couldn't name, heavier than anger, deeper than pity. The next 2 days blurred together. Lesson plans, emails, yard work, I kept busy, avoiding thoughts of Daisy. I knew she was in good hands with my mom, a retired nurse who could navigate the healthcare system better than anyone. Friday arrived faster than I expected. On the way to Mom's house, I picked up a bottle of wine. Daisy opened the door when I arrived. Her glassy eyes and tear-streaked face spoke volumes. Thanks, I muttered, stepping past her. The smell of lasagna greeted me in the kitchen. Mom turned with a warm smile when she saw me holding the wine. I handed it to her, hugged her briefly, and we sat down to eat. Daisy picked at her food, barely touching it. Her hands trembled slightly, and the silence felt heavy. How did it go today? I asked, breaking the tension. Mom forced a small smile. We got her application approved. Medicaid will cover the treatment, and she'll receive a monthly allowance. It's not much, but it's something. I nodded, relieved. And Robert? Will they go after him for anything? They'll try, Mom said softly. But he doesn't have anything left. I sighed. And the oncologist? The shift was immediate. Mom's smile faded, and Daisy's face went pale. They confirmed it, Mom said quietly. Stage 4 cervical cancer. It's already spreading. The air left my lungs. But it can be treated, right? Mom glanced at Daisy, who nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. There's treatment, but the survival rate is less than 20%. If this had been caught 3 or 4 years ago, Mom added, her odds would have been over 90%. But now, 3 or 4 years, I echoed. You've had this for that long, Daisy. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I didn't know. There were signs, but I thought it was stress. I didn't want to add to Robert's problems. And eventually, we stopped being intimate. The pain was too much. Silence settled over the table. I stared at a spot on the wood grain, unable to look at her. Mom spoke softly, filling the silence. We'll start treatment immediately. Dr. McGregor is optimistic about managing the pain and giving her some quality of life. I nodded stiffly. Good. Dinner continued in silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a fork against a plate. The doctors have medication that might help, Mom said gently. It could improve her odds by 10 or 15%. It's not much, but it's something. I exhaled slowly. So what happens now, Daisy? What's your plan? Her voice was steadier than I expected. I don't have much of a choice, Mike. I can fight or give up. And I'm not ready to give up yet. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I used to know, the one who faced challenges head-on. How long will treatment take? I asked, looking at Mom. It could be a year, maybe more, she said. A year. An eternity in limbo. And she'll be with you the whole time. Yes. I'm retired, but I still know how to care for patients. I'll be here around the clock. I nodded. Are you sure you can handle this, Mom? She looked me straight in the eyes. I can handle it, Mike. But can you? I turned to Daisy. Once, I would have moved mountains for her. Now, all I felt was a hollow ache, tangled with anger and obligation. I know you don't trust me, she said softly. And I don't deserve it. That's an understatement. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. If you ever hurt my mother, cause drama, make her life harder, I will throw you out. Cancer or no cancer. Her head dropped. I understand. Mom stood and began clearing the table. Let me bring dessert. I'll help. No, Mike. You two need to talk. When we were alone, Daisy spoke quietly. I started reading your book. It's powerful. Was I really that awful to you? I stared at her. I hired a videographer for our 10th anniversary. I thought we'd show it to our kids someday. Instead, it captured everything, every word, every look, every humiliation. Other guests sent me their footage too. Her face crumpled. Oh my God, I've watched those videos more times than I care to admit. Every betrayal, every moment, it's all in the book. She covered her face with trembling hands, shoulders shaking as quiet sobs escaped her. Mom returned with apple pie and 2 plates, her expression tight. She set them down without a word and gave me a look that said, "Enough." Daisy wiped her face and tried to smile faintly. "You look good, Mike. Better than ever. Martial arts. Exercise. It helped." We ate in silence, though none of us had much appetite. When it was time to leave, Mom walked me to the door. "Are you sure about this, Mom? What about Daisy's family? Can't they help?" "I called them," she said softly. "Her parents are in a nursing home in Florida. Her sister won't speak to her. She has no one else, Mike." I nodded, throat tight. "Family takes care of family, right?" "Always," Mom said gently. We said our goodbyes, and I left feeling heavier than I had in years. Daisy stayed with Mom for weeks, but I couldn't shake the unease every time I thought about her being there. What if she hurts herself? What if she hurts Mom? I asked once. "She won't," Mom said calmly. "But I understand why you're worried. Daisy has nothing left, Mike. People with nothing have nothing to lose." "That's what worries me," I muttered. "Just try not to let your anger get the better of you," she said softly. "Whatever rope she's clinging to, don't cut it." I promised I'd try. The weeks blurred into a routine. I visited every Friday for dinner. Daisy grew thinner, her skin paler, her hair eventually disappearing entirely. By mid-August, she wore a bamboo chemo cap, her fragility impossible to ignore. I kept my distance emotionally, but I learned to be polite, for Mom's sake, for peace. Child support checks from Bruce started trickling in. It wasn't much, but Daisy opened a bank account, and Mom made sure every cent was accounted for. Daisy insisted Mom keep a portion for expenses. Mom finally agreed, though I suspected she was quietly setting it aside for funeral costs. Then came the Friday before school started. I pulled into Mom's driveway and noticed an unfamiliar, battered Toyota parked at the curb. Wisconsin plates. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. I parked and stepped inside. Mom was on the couch, pale and tense. Daisy sat wrapped in a blanket, frail and quiet. From the kitchen, I heard footsteps and the clink of metal. Robert emerged, holding a soda can and half-eaten sandwich. The confident doctor I remembered was gone. His hair was greasy, his beard patchy, and his clothes, dirty denim and stained jeans, hung off his thin frame. "Well, if it isn't the teacher," he sneered. I stayed still, every martial arts lesson whispering, "Stay calm." "What do you want, Robert?" "I want the money she stole from me," he spat. "Stole? You mean the court-ordered payments for her care?" "It's all the same. They took my money. Now I'm being evicted." "But you had enough for gas to drive here from Milwaukee," I said evenly. His lip twitched. "Don't get smart with me." He set down the sandwich, his hand vanishing behind his back. When it reappeared, it held a revolver. Time froze. "I've got a cure for her cancer right here," he said, pointing the gun at Daisy. Mom's voice shook. "Robert, please. The police are on their way. Just leave." I stepped slightly in front of Daisy, but Robert snapped the gun toward me. "Stay where you are, teacher." Red and blue lights flashed outside. A loudspeaker blared, "Mr. Williams, put down the weapon and step outside with your hands up." Robert's eyes darted to the window. Panic flashed across his face. "This won't end well for you," I said softly. 2 officers burst through the back door, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon," one shouted. Robert spun, raising the gun. The officers fired. The cracks of gunfire filled the room. Mom screamed. Daisy whimpered. Robert collapsed, the revolver skidding across the floor. Paramedics arrived quickly. One checked Robert and shook his head. Another tended to Daisy, her blanket now stained with blood. Mom clung to me, trembling. A detective pulled me aside for my statement. I recounted everything, my voice flat and hollow. As paramedics wheeled Daisy out on a stretcher, her face pale beneath an oxygen mask, Mom tried to follow, but there was no room in the ambulance. "You can come with me," I said softly. The detective handed Mom a business card for a cleaning service. "Call them when it's time." We drove to the hospital in silence. Hours passed in the waiting room. Mom cried quietly once, clutching a tissue. Finally, a doctor approached. "She's stable. The bullet passed through without hitting anything vital. An inch to the left, and she wouldn't have made it." Relief flooded Mom's face. "Thank God." "But," the doctor continued, "her immune system is severely weakened from the chemotherapy. There are signs of infection. We're running tests, but she'll need to stay here for at least 3 days." Mom asked if we could see her. "Not until tomorrow," the doctor said, handing us a number to call for updates. We left the hospital, the weight of everything settling in the silence of the car. Back at Mom's house, the crime scene tape was already torn down. A note pinned to the door said the scene was cleared, the door locked, and the key left with a neighbor. Inside, the chaos lingered. The chair where Daisy had sat was stained, and blood speckled the floor. Without a word, I carried the chair to the car to take it to the dump. When I returned, I found Mom kneeling on the hardwood floor, scrubbing the dried blood with trembling hands. Tears mixed with the soapy water, creating pale red puddles. I stood silently for a moment. "Is there anything I can do to help?" She didn't look up. "Thank you for asking, James, but no. I've cleaned worse messes in my life." The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. "Would you like to stay at my place tonight?" I asked quietly. "That won't be necessary," Mom said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I need to be here in case the hospital calls." I hesitated. "Then I'll stay here with you." "You don't have to, James." "I know. But I'm going to anyway. And if you insist on cleaning, I'll cook. Scrambled eggs and bacon. Maybe we'll open that bottle of wine." She managed a faint smile and went back to scrubbing the floor. That night, we shared a simple meal, sipped wine in silence, and eventually went to bed. Despite everything, sleep came surprisingly easy, whether from exhaustion or the wine, I wasn't sure. The next morning, the phone rang around 10. I stepped away to give Mom privacy. When she emerged, her face was unreadable. "Emily's stable. They're running more tests, but she should be back in her room by this afternoon." I nodded, feeling hollow. "Would you mind driving me to the hospital later?" "Of course." "What time?" 2:30. "I'll be here." I left early to drop the broken chair at the dump and run a few errands. By the time I returned, Mom was ready. We stopped at the hospital gift shop. Mom picked a card and white carnations. I grabbed an Agatha Christie novel, the same one Emily had been reading all those years ago. Mom gave me a small, knowing smile. "What?" I asked defensively. "Nothing." "Don't start, Mom. James, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And whether you admit it or not, the fact that you're here, buying her favorite flowers and that book, says a lot." I sighed and paid for the items. In Emily's hospital room, she was awake but looked drained, like a shadow of herself. Mom handed her the card, and I placed the flowers on the nightstand. Emily's lips quivered when she saw the book. "You remembered," she whispered. "Yeah," I said softly. "You were reading this when you left." She clutched the book to her chest, her eyes welling up. "They haven't given me updates yet," she said weakly. "They said I'll hear more tomorrow." Mom patted her hand. "They'll figure it out, sweetheart." A nurse entered, checked Emily's vitals, and handed her a cup of pills. "Please, just call me Emily," she said. "I can't change the past, but I can try to move forward." The nurse smiled warmly. "I'll let the staff know." After a brief exchange, the nurse suggested Emily rest. We said our goodbyes and left. As I closed the door, I caught Emily's lingering gaze. The next morning, Mom arrived early at the hospital. I joined her a few hours later, just in time to meet two doctors, Dr. Samuels, the surgeon, and Dr. Kincaid, Emily's oncologist. Both wore composed expressions, but their eyes carried the weight of bad news. Dr. Kincaid spoke first. Emily is suffering from severe peritonitis and diverticulitis. There's a significant infection in her abdomen, and we suspect her gallbladder is punctured. How did this happen? I asked tightly. Dr. Samuels stepped in. Cancer, chemotherapy, a weakened immune system, there's no single cause, but everything combined led us here. What happens now? Mom asked. We need to stabilize her with high-dose antibiotics before surgery. Chemotherapy is suspended indefinitely. What are her chances? I forced myself to ask. The two doctors exchanged a glance. Dr. Samuels sighed. I won't sugarcoat it. The infection is severe, and surgery is risky. Even if we clear it, her body might not recover. What's the percentage? Emily's faint voice cut through the room. The doctors hesitated before Dr. Kincaid spoke. Less than 20%. Emily nodded slowly, her lips trembling. Thank you for being honest. The doctors left, and silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Later that day, back at Mom's house, the weight of the news pressed down on us both. I found Mom kneeling on the kitchen floor, scrubbing at faint traces of dried blood. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs as tears mixed with soapy water. I stood there for a moment before speaking. Is there anything I can do to help? She didn't look up. Thank you for asking, James, but no. I've cleaned worse messes in my life. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I felt a pang of something sharp in my chest, guilt, maybe. Or regret. 30 to 40%, Dr. Kincaid said softly. Emily closed her eyes briefly. So either way, it's a gamble. Dr. Samuels nodded. But without surgery, there's no chance at all. Then we'll do the surgery, she whispered. The doctors left to make arrangements. Emily broke down, sobbing into frail hands. Mom held her, whispering soft reassurances. I stood frozen, watching the woman I'd once loved reduced to someone fragile, hollow. After leaving the hospital, Mom and I drove home in silence, the kind where every word feels too heavy to speak. Back at the house, Mom disappeared into her room and returned with a small photo, Emily in a chemo cap, offering a faint smile. I thought you might want this, she said, placing it in front of me. I studied it. The smile wasn't joyful or forced, it was accepting. Thanks, I said, hugging her briefly. We cleaned the kitchen together before Mom handed me a slip of paper. This is Emily's parents' number. Would you mind calling them? I don't think I can handle it. Yeah, I'll call them when I get home. That night, I poured myself a drink and stared at the number before finally dialing. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Hello. Fred, it's James Carpenter. A long pause. What do you want? I swallowed. Emily passed away during surgery today. Silence. I don't have a daughter named Emily, he said coldly. You did once. I thought you'd want to know. So what do you expect? You want me to care? To ask for her body back? No. She donated her body to cancer research. He let out a bitter laugh. Well, at least she was good for something in the end. Don't call here again. The line went dead. I sat there, anger bubbling briefly before fading into exhaustion. The next morning, I called my principal. I'm sorry, James. How are you holding up? I'll manage. Take the week off. It's paid leave, just take some time for yourself. Thanks. After the call, I found the envelope Emily had left in her hospital room. Her handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. James. If you're reading this, I didn't make it through surgery. Thank you for being there these past few months, even when I didn't deserve it. You and your mother showed me kindness when everyone else turned away. I can never repay that. I know I hurt you. What I did was unforgivable, and I'm deeply sorry, for Bruce, for the lies, for breaking your trust. You were a good man, James. Better than I deserved. Please, don't let my mistakes ruin your life. Let yourself love again. You deserve happiness, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Goodbye, James. Emily. By the end, my hands were trembling, my face wet with tears I hadn't realized were falling. Grief. Anger. Regret. The dam I'd built around my emotions finally cracked, and everything poured out. That evening, I went back to Mom's house. We sat quietly on the couch, the air thick with shared grief. At some point, she handed me a small box, the money Emily had insisted she keep from the child support payments. What should we do with this? Mom asked softly. Donate it, I said after a moment. A cancer research fund. Something good should come from it. Mom nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. We sat in silence, two people carrying different pieces of the same burden, each finding small fragments of closure in the quiet. Life didn't magically become perfect after Emily was gone. The betrayal still lingered, but its weight wasn't crushing anymore. I went back to work, filled my days with lesson plans, and tried to adjust to a quieter kind of grief. One afternoon, parked outside a diner, I spotted a woman sitting alone by the window, engrossed in a book. For a moment, I considered walking in, saying hello, starting over. But the light turned green, and I drove away. Not today. But maybe someday. Cemeteries have always made me uneasy, the quiet, the endless rows of stone reminders of life's fragility. But I had made a promise, to myself, to Emily, and, in some way, to my mother. The cemetery gates creaked as I stepped through. Sunlight cut through the trees in pale, sharp beams. Despite the brightness, the air felt muted, as if the world itself had dimmed out of respect. Emily's headstone wasn't hard to find. A simple granite marker with Emily Williams engraved on it, a bureaucratic detail I'd fought against but lost. At the base, a small bronze vase held a single white carnation I had placed weeks ago, now slightly wilted. When her ashes were returned from the medical school, Mom and I decided on burial. Scattering them somewhere felt too impersonal, too fleeting. Bruce, on the other hand, was buried in a forgotten corner of another cemetery, his grave marked only by a numbered concrete slab. I had visited once, just once, and left something behind that wasn't flowers. I stood there for a while, staring at her name, feeling nothing and everything all at once. The grief had settled into something still, quiet, less like mourning and more like acceptance. As I turned to leave, I noticed two figures nearby. A woman in a simple black dress stood beside a headstone, her blonde hair pulled into a neat braid trailing down her back. Beside her stood a young boy, maybe 8 years old, clinging to her hand. His oversized camouflage jacket made him look even smaller. Curiosity, or something like it, pulled me toward them. The headstone read, Ryan G. Langford. Sergeant, USMC. September 9, 1990 to September 10, 2022. Husband. Father. Marine. He will be greatly missed. Two symbols, a silver star and a purple heart, were carved beneath the inscription. The woman noticed me and gave a polite nod. Her blue eyes held a quiet strength, the kind that made you stand a little straighter. I'm sorry, I said softly. I didn't mean to intrude. The boy turned his wide, heavy eyes toward me. I miss him so much. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a fact, a small, fragile truth spoken aloud. Kneeling down, I pulled a small notepad and pen from my jacket pocket. Here, kid. Write him a note. Tell him whatever's on your mind. When you're done, roll it up and tuck it into the crack by the stone. I'm sure he'll get it. The boy took the pen and paper with reverence, his tiny hands trembling slightly. His mother's face softened, her lips pressed tightly together as she whispered, "Thank you." While the boy wrote, the woman and I exchanged a long look, two strangers tethered by grief and a cemetery mourning. As I turned to leave, a faint breeze stirred the air. Somewhere, on the edge of my hearing, I thought I heard a soft chuckle, a woman's laugh, light and familiar. And then, a faint whisper, "Keep your promise." I paused, feeling something shift inside me, a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Walking back to my car, I glanced up at the clear June sky and realized something, maybe tomorrow wouldn't be so bad after all.